You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
Hello, Gemma here from True Crime Conversations, and this week as we continue with our summer content, we're bringing you Mamamia's investigation into the disappearance of Peng Shuai. Our Extraordinary Stories team looked at how a beloved Chinese tennis player shared details of an affair and sexual assault involving one of China's highest-ranking political figures before vanishing. We'll be back soon with fresh episodes exploring the world's most notorious crimes with the people who know the most about them. In the meantime, please enjoy part 1 of our 3-part investigation into Peng Shuai.
It was after 10 p.m. on November 2nd, 2021 when 35-year-old Peng Shuai, 3-time Olympian and China's beloved global tennis star, sat down and began pounding the keys of her laptop. The characters poured out of her, anger and sadness clear in the words she wrote, truncated sentences of an open letter/pseudo-essay detailing an affair and sexual assault involving one of China's highest-ranking political figures.
I was very scared that afternoon. I had not expected things to go this way. Someone was guarding outside. 7 years earlier, we had sexual relations once, and then you never contacted me again. I had buried it all inside me. And since you were not planning on taking responsibility at all, why did you come back and look for me again, take me to your house, and force me into sex?
Peng Shuai hit send, uploading her explosive story on the popular Chinese social media site Weibo to her 500,000 followers and a community of millions more. It took only a few minutes before the post had amassed thousands of shares, likes and comments. For a moment, it was everywhere. But within half an hour, it vanished. And moments later, so too did Peng Shuai.
Everybody in China knows political figures have, mistresses. They are abusive in their personal relationships. But everybody at the same time knows accusing a high-level political official of misconduct is very, very dangerous.
Welcome to Extraordinary Stories, Where is Peng Shuai? In this series, we'll explore the tennis player who, just hours after posting serious allegations against a top government minister on Chinese social media, vanished from public sight.
I just want her to be okay and that she's safe and that we hear from something hopefully very soon.
Where did she go? Was she okay? Was she alive? The world was demanding answers. Then, proof of life.
It would appear that Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai has made her first confirmed appearance back in the public eye. A Chinese state media editor releasing a video appearing to show the former doubles world number 1 being introduced alongside the China Open director at a youth tennis tournament on Sunday. ABC News did confirm that tournament took place Sunday morning, where Peng Shuai was seen smiling, waving and signing giant tennis balls for the kids, but we couldn't independently verify the authenticity of those images.
What followed? More staged photo ops, Peng Shuai flanked by Chinese Communist Party officials at all times, and a shocking retraction and denial of the confession that rocked the tennis community and human rights advocates the world over.
If the Chinese government tells you what to do, you have to do it.
I'm Emma Gillespie, and this is Extraordinary Stories. It's the 2018 Australian Open at Melbourne Park. Peng Shuai is the most recognised tennis player ever to come out of China.
I love tennis. I want to be on the court and sweat, fight. I just want to be happy on the court.
This is her. She's in a promotional shoot for the Oz Open.
Can you please look at the camera
Okay.
and just say happy? Just the word?
Happy.
She had plenty of things to be happy about. Back then, Peng Shuai was China's number one. and she was ranked 27th in the world, about to make it into the Grand Slam doubles finals.
40.
She narrowly missed out on Grand Slam glory, but as her doubles partner from the year before, Andrea Hlaskova, told 60 Minutes recently, Peng was a force on and off the court.
She would finish her singles, she would go play doubles, and then she would go for 2-3 hours more for practice. And back again. Like, I'm not kidding, it was crazy.
She sounds so driven, so determined.
Yes, absolutely.
She is a top Chinese tennis star. She was used to be the number one in women's double. I mean, tennis isn't that popular in China, but it has gained more and more popularity over the years. But China hasn't produced like number one tennis star like in the US or in Australia. So, I mean, for her to, achieve number one in women's double is a big deal for China.
That's human rights advocate Yaqiu Wang. We'll hear more from her soon. While Peng was a formidable athlete on the court, there was something different about her off it, a certain independence and drive. These are both characteristics to be mired in any athlete, right? But why is it different in China? Why is it dangerous? Here in Australia, we celebrate the bravery of women like Maddie Groves, the Aussie swimmer who accused Swimming Australia of fostering a culture of misogyny, one where she claims she was molested by a person who still works in the sport.
It really doesn't feel like much has changed since I was growing up. It just really seems like there is this vicious cycle of, using and abusing female athletes until they're burnt out and broken.
And as far as our sportsmen with fiery personalities, take Nick Kyrgios, a man who has built an entire public image off the back of being criticised for having an entitled attitude. And yet when he's winning, we love him.
Yeah, I guess it's just the culture of tennis. It's supposed to be a nice, white, gentleman sport, So seeing someone coloured like myself go out there, be different and be successful, it's not so easy to see at times.
But for an athlete in China, expressing yourself in the way a Maddie Groves or a Nick Kyrgios might is just not an option. Matthew Futterman is a veteran sports reporter with the New York Times. He told the Daily Podcast last year that before Peng revealed her secret on Weibo, she was an important asset in the Chinese Communist Party agenda.
She's born in 1986 in Hunan province, begins to play tennis as a young girl, and she shows some promise. And what I think is important about her story is that she is born sort of right in the sweet spot of where China is in terms of trying to establish itself in mainstream sports. There are certain sports that China has been very good at for a very long time, most notably table tennis. But in the 1990s, China sort of decides that it wants to use sports to establish itself as a really sort of well-rounded world power.
Peng Shuai was everything Chinese government officials had longed to discover, a child prodigy developed at a national sports school from a young age. This was the woman who would bring tennis to China and who'd show the world that her home country was producing serious athletes.
She starts winning some tournaments and winning some matches in the early 2000s and begins to establish herself in the later 2000s as someone who can play with the best players in the world. And that really climaxes in 2013 when, playing with her Taiwanese doubles partner, Tsai Su Wei, she wins the Wimbledon doubles championship. The next year, she wins the French Open doubles championship, and she actually even makes the US Open singles semifinals that year as well.
But within a few years, China's golden girl of tennis would land her country and her sport in the spotlight for different reasons. Peng Shuai condemning her future by daring to run afoul of her government's agenda. Here's what the Women's Tennis Association CEO Steve Simon had to say about her recently.
We have a woman who has had the courage to step up and reflect some significant allegations of sexual assault and harassment against a very high-level political official within China.
Despite Peng's impressive feats at Grand Slams the world over, many of us hadn't really heard of her before that infamous Weibo post in 2021.
Peng Shuai posted on social media the details of an alleged forced affair with and sexual assault by the former vice premier of China. Now she's missing, and the loudest voices in the tennis world are calling for answers.
Honestly, it's shocking. It's someone that I've seen on the tour in the previous years quite a few times.
I can't think of anything like this ever happening before. Everything about this story just screams out trouble. It screams out something's wrong.
Naomi Osaka joining the chorus of worried athletes now putting pressure on the Chinese government, tweeting, "Censorship is never okay at any cost. I hope Peng Shuai and her family are safe and okay. I'm in shock of the current situation, and I'm sending love and light her way."
Fast forward to 2022, and Peng Shuai's post on Weibo has long since vanished. The Chinese Communist Party censorship machine moved swiftly to remove not only her original essay, but all trace of her claims and any conversation it may have inspired.
During that 30 minutes, people were fiercely discussing it. 30 minutes later, the censorship came, you can feel it, like things are being deleted. Like you want to post her name, you want to post Zhang Gaoli's name, it could not be posted. Then, in the few days of that, even words like tennis are being censored. But people still have memory because it was fiercely discussed within 30 minutes. So people start to invent new ways to talk about this issue without mentioning their names, without mentioning tennis.
Yaqiu Wang is a human rights advocate living and working in New York City as a senior researcher for Human Rights Watch. She explains.
But I think, then because the censorship was so very well overwhelming, and also everybody knows, the real danger if you keep talking about something the government clearly shows that you should not talk about, then people refrain from talking about it. So I think the case in China kind of died down after a few days, after a few weeks. Interestingly, her case kept being talked about outside of China's censorship. It's very interesting, like how a case that is so well known outside of China that happened in China, by this day, people in China are not that really aware of that.
By now, you might be wondering, in 2021, how could an elite athlete just vanish? And what about freedom of speech? How could her home country silence her? Before we can understand what is still happening to Peng Shuai, we first need to understand the modern-day political and social climate in China. Now, it's worth mentioning here that some of the people you're going to hear from over the next few episodes have risked more than you might think. Even reaching out for interviews, we were told by some commentators that they couldn't talk to us while they were still within mainland China, that it wouldn't be safe for them. Here's Yaqiu again.
China is ruled by the Chinese Communist Party. It's a one-party system. The party controls, the media, the internet, or even private business beholden to the Chinese government. It's very hard for a Chinese private business person to say to the Chinese government for whatever thing they demand. Even you're like a number one billionaire, you created this gigantic Chinese Amazon. If the Chinese government tells you what to do, you have to do it. So, in a lot of ways, just as long as you are a citizen in China, you live in China, you don't have the freedom of speech, you don't have the freedom of movement, you cannot protest, your property are not really guaranteed, in all kinds of ways. The government just has so much power over you.
With that power comes harsh censorship of Chinese citizens, particularly across media and the online space. The version of the internet Chinese people have access to isn't the same as the far-reaching, infinite and immense web you or I use. While every tech company, whether in the US or China, have to moderate their content to some extent, be that for things like pornography or violence. Yachu says the moderation in China extends to removing any and all content that is critical of the Chinese Communist Party.
And they hire, tens of thousands of content moderators just to focus on that kind of content. And usually the companies do it themselves because in order to stay in business, in order to not be cracked down, not be closed down, they have to hire those people and do this kind of content moderation. And, oftentimes the government give them directives, like big guidelines. These are the things you have to censor. Then they need to figure out the specifics. How do I censor my own platform to make sure that I don't provoke the wrath of the government?
Yachu says the government in China even send their own police officers to be stationed within social media companies, like part of the company's internal staff, on the ground as a physical presence to intimidate companies into compliance.
So there's this direct monitoring by the government. This very close, I would say, cooperation between the government and the social media content. So social media companies can, be in good terms of the government and stay in business.
And instead of Facebook or Instagram, there's a platform called Weibo. Yachu Wang says it's kind of like Twitter, and it used to be a rare space where activism could flourish in some way.
The Chinese company invented their own kind of similar to Twitter because Twitter was shut down. So Chinese people inside China, they all migrated to Weibo because Twitter is gone. And initially, I would say, in the early 2010s, Weibo was really a place that people discuss about social issues. There is always restrictions. You cannot say anything about the Tiananmen massacre. You cannot criticize the president. People know that. But beyond that, there are still a lot of things you can discuss, like local corruption, environmental issues, women's rights, domestic violence. Those are social issues. People all discuss fiercely on the platform. For some activists, they would have, let's say, 20 million followers, and they're all very keen about discussing those issues.
Weibo is used by millions of Chinese people, but the way it's used has shifted over the past decade, and today it's more strictly monitored and moderated by government officials than ever.
In 2013, there were major crackdowns against, the activist type. Then they were detained, imprisoned. Then over the years after 2013, just the censorship on the platform got worse and worse. It used to be you can discuss local corruption, environmental protests, all those were censored. Then, I would say today the platform is much more focused on entertainment. Then the government's propaganda is much heavier on that platform. I think for a lot of people they care about social justice issues, they just feel, the platform is no longer that useful for discussing those issues.
So what happens to those who do speak out against China? Dr. Chongyi Fang is an associate professor in China Studies at the University of Technology, Sydney. Not only is he an expert on the political climate in China, he's also someone who's experienced detainment at the hands of the Chinese government. The academic was held and questioned for 7 days after a 3-week research trip in southern China in 2017. He says Chinese detention is among the worst and most notorious in the modern world. Here's what he told SBS News about his experience behind bars in China.
Authorities created to deal with political dissidents and other government officials who are put under detention at a facility run by secret police to extract confession, to establish a case against the suspect. In order to extract the confession, usually they apply all forms of very skillful, delicate torture. That facility, it is a small cell, 10 square meters, without window. There's no bed. It's a mattress on the floor. And then the light is kept on 24 hours. And there will be 2 guards 24 hours around the clock. And then the suspect will not be allowed to go outside of that room unless he or she is subject to continuous interrogation. Interrogation can last for a whole day.
What happened to Chong Yifeng, Peng Shuai and countless of other Chinese individuals is what's known as forced disappearances. Senior researcher at Human Rights Watch, Ya-Chu Wang, has watched Beijing's long history of enforcing these disappearances on individuals who dare to disagree with them. From political opponents to anyone whose views or actions may not align with the Chinese Communist Party ideals, under the leadership of Xi Jinping.
This happened before to many human rights activists, lawyers, business people who somehow got into bad blood with the Chinese government for criticizing government or somehow made the Chinese government unhappy. So they usually disappeared. Then they reappear on some TV program saying that I confessed to my crime, I did something wrong, I'm going to reform, things like that.
Just a year before Peng Shuai made her post on Weibo, billionaire tech guru and founder of Alibaba, think of it like China's version of Amazon, Jack Ma vanished for 3 months. After he resurfaced, he explained he'd been re-educated by the government while his company was hit with billions of dollars in fines and forcibly restructured and scaled down.
The billionaire founder of China's giant online retailer Alibaba has not been seen in public since October.
He is very powerful, very wealthy, and generally a very public figure. But since giving this speech that was critical of China's government, Jack Ma hasn't been seen in public, and now many are questioning, where is Jack Ma?
This long line of forced disappearances that preceded Peng Shuai's allegations meant she knew exactly what was at risk on that November night when she took to Weibo. And even knowing all of those potential risks, her truth still mattered more to her. Peng Shuai accused Zhang Gaoli of forcing her to have sex with him.
Zhang Gaoli was a member of the Standing Politburo Committee. The 7-member committee, Politburo, is the highest governing body of the Chinese Communist Party system. And interestingly, he was also the person who was responsible for the 2022 Beijing Olympic Games.
The Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party is the decision-making body of the Chinese government. A man like Zhang Gaoli or anyone within that committee is considered completely untouchable.
You don't hear their stories at all. You don't hear about their personal lives at all. Everything about them is carefully managed. Anything you hear about them is done by the Chinese government propaganda machine. There's no way, a random person can talk to such a high-level official without the government being able to manage the situation.
On the 2nd of November 2021, Peng Shuai made a decision that would shock the Chinese government, its people, and the world when she finally revealed a long-kept secret. She accused China's former Vice Premier Zhang Gaoli of sexually assaulting her in his home, with his wife and at least one other person also in the house.
I have no proof, and it would be impossible for me to keep any evidence. You denied everything afterwards, but it is true that you liked me first, or otherwise I wouldn't have had a way to come into contact with you. This is the same disappearing act as 7 years ago, getting rid of me after you're done playing with me. You said there were no transactions between us. That's true, with all the feelings and money between us, it had nothing to do with power and wealth. But I have nowhere to leave my feelings. It's very hard to face. I know that for someone of your status, Vice Premier Zhang Gaoli, you've said that you're not afraid. But even it's like striking a stone with an egg and courting self-destruction like a moth to the flame. I will tell the truth about you.
In a lengthy and emotional post, Peng claimed the pair had sustained an intermittent affair for the better part of a decade. She detailed how one of China's most powerful officials had used her for sex and then essentially ghosted her.
The content of that post, it wasn't very, meticulously structured, a story that is so well told. It was more an outburst of anger and sadness and frustration. So when you read it, you can sense the authenticity. She felt hurt. She felt wronged.
But Peng Shuai had credibility. People instantly believed her.
Peng Shuai is very well known. She's famous. The person she's accused of sexual assault is also very well known. She's one of the top officials in the Chinese political system. It's harder to get higher than he was. So in a way, people were just shocked by such a high-level official being accused of sexual assault, and by a famous woman. It's like, if it's just a random woman nobody ever heard of, people would suspect where this woman would try to get something from doing this, right? But her fame, her prominence in China landed her instant credibility.
No matter how quickly the Chinese authorities jumped into action to clean up this latest mess, it would be too late. Thanks to Peng Shuai's international prominence and the internet, of course, word spread internationally swiftly.
I was in the US. It was my nighttime. So I got alerted of this thing was going on. So I went to Weibo and checking. People were discussing it fiercely.
Yachu began thinking the worst.
At that point, I just felt, I don't know what's going to happen to her. I just felt, she's going to disappear. And we probably will never hear from her. And I don't think she will be able to get out of the country. The government will fear that if she is able to leave, they can no longer control her.
The world would hold its breath for 3 weeks, wondering not just where Peng Shuai was, but if she was safe, if she was alive. Next time on Extraordinary Stories, we investigate the silencing of Peng Shuai in the aftermath of her Weibo post, as masses of onlookers from afar nervously awaited proof of her safety. But even once we were shown a seemingly healthy-looking Peng Shuai, the question of her freedom didn't seem to be as simple to answer. How does a young, prominent woman go from finding the strength to write this in her powerful open letter?
You told me you loved me from the beginning to end. You have always asked me to keep my relationship with you a secret. I felt like a walking corpse. I was pretending so much every day that I didn't know who the real me was anymore.
To telling Chinese and Western media, I have never said or written about anyone assaulting me. Thanks for listening to this episode of Extraordinary Stories. It was written and produced by me, Emma Gillespie, with Tia Usich, Sydney Peed and Callie Borg. Audio production is by Madeline Joannou. We'll see you next time.